Today's an interesting day for me because I get a chance to tell a story about something. And I like telling stories, I enjoy them. Especially when the stories are vital and they're true. Some of these stories are kind of, I'm not going to say the escapades or falsities, but they're just big old stories that don't amount to hill of beans. But when you hear stories from the Word, those stories, like we heard last week, are in relationship is in relationship to our kinfolk. And I think the way it was put last week was so eloquently laid out there that it let us know where we stand and where we came from, and the people that were there before us that are related to us. It's just so awesome the way it was laid out. But I want to tell you about somebody that had the opportunity to actually adapt. But in his adaptation or his adaptation, something really, really happened to this individual. And his story is so interesting. I think sometimes we overlook, or we don't overlook, but it calls us to have an oversight in the Word that God gives us. And we can tell our children these stories and really make it exciting. So when you tell a child a story about something that you really enjoy, or a story that's read to them, even if it's just the Three Little Bears or something, but if it's a story that's basically from the Word of God, and it's a story like the one I'm about to tell you about, you can make it exciting. You can make it interesting. You can make it captivating. You can bring it to a child's ears to where they can imagine in their mental perception what's going on in that story. And that's the ability we have. Well, God had that same ability to give us this story and allow us to see what was transpiring in the story about a man I'm about to tell you about.
All right.
Now, in this generation, for this particular individual, the world was corrupt. It was really bad. Things were happening that made God displeased. He was really displeased. But in everything that was happening, he said, I've got to end all this. This has got to stop. But it's amazing how God can see one individual that was following after him, that was doing the thing that he could say, hey, this man loves me. And he saw this man as righteous and honorable in his eyesight. And back then, you have to understand, you didn't get to live 120 years. You got to live 500, 700, 900. So, I mean, even though the years could pile up, you lived for a long time. This particular man, at the time, was the young age of 500 years old.
All right.
500. Can you imagine being 5? Yeah, I can't imagine. I can't imagine 120, let alone 500 years. And I think people back then didn't look at the age aspect or living 500 years. They was living.
That's right.
Because God gave them the opportunity to live that long. So this particular individual was 500 years old, and in his life, he found grace and favor in the eyes of the Lord. And that's awesome. Especially if you're the only one that found that grace and favor in the eyes of the Lord. He was a just and a righteous man. Blameless in his evil generation, at least what was going on at that time. And he walked in, and this is what's important, he walked in habitual fellowship with God.
Yes.
Now when you walk in fellowship with God, that means you're communing with him, you're talking to him, you're praying to him. You're saying, it's like I'm having a conversation with my BFF. It's a normal, everyday occurrence if you walk in fellowship with the Lord. And this person, by the name of Noah, he was obedient to every word and order given to him by God. Now, I will tell you this, during his process of living and all these things going on, he did face some adversities.
Yes.
Now, if you're 500 years old and God has seen that this generation is a cursed generation, and he comes to the conclusion, well, I'm just going to take everybody out. I'm just going to end this. I'm not happy with these folks. They ain't doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're acting crazy down here. But God had to put his foot down. And when he put his foot down, that meant that everybody that wasn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're about to become invisible. In other words, they'll be non-existent. But there was one man that God had communion and fellowship with, and it was Noah. But understand also that Noah, being 500 years old, he was obedient to God, period. And what really fascinates me about Noah was not the fact that he was 500 years old, but if you commune with the Lord every day. So when he all of a sudden speaks to you and says, I'm not happy with what's going on down there, Noah. Now, I've been thinking over some things, and I think I'm just going to blot everybody out. I'm going to let you hang around. But I need you to do something for me and for your family. I need you to build something. Now, when he put his mind to tell Noah, I need you to build something, Noah had some adversities in there. Now, me personally, Deacon, if you tell me to build a boat, I'm not no type of boatman or architecture or anything like that, I'm going to start wondering, well, how am I going to go about doing this? But see, the good thing about it is God doesn't lead you into anything that he doesn't give you instructions on how to do what you need to do.
That's right.
He don't leave you hanging like a lot of folks do. He going to give you everything you need to do. He going to give you the groundwork. He's going to give you the blueprint. He's going to give you everything you need. All you have to do is be obedient.
Amen.
So Noah, being an obedient man, he was given instructions. And these instructions was to build this big ship, this ark, this vessel. Now you can understand that it's like they talk about it in Texas, they don't do nothing small. Well, the Lord didn't do nothing small. In his ark building, he had a mind to build something big. We ain't talking about the Titanic, we're talking about something you can put the Titanic in. When we talk about how big this ark was going to be, we don't talk about a football field, we talk about 200 feet longer than a football field. So we're talking about dynamic, awesome, unbelievable. This thing is gigantic. So he gives Noah the instructions. He tells Noah that I want you to build this so many cubic and so many the cubic this and so many big this, and he had instructed the type of wood that he was supposed to use and how much wood. Now I told you Noah had some adversities in this issue, but think about it. At 500 years old, Noah had to chop the tree and prepare the tree and the wood to put on this big vessel. Now don't get me wrong, I know that Noah wasn't doing all this by himself, but he was the sanford, and then he had the sons. Okay,
All right.
so he had Lamont doing the work, and then we'll say his son doing the work, and he had help with this because there's no way he could do this by himself. But he had the instruction and the blueprint to do it, and that's the main thing. If God gives you the instructions and the blueprint, and he gives you the task, you can complete it. It's not an issue. You can handle it.
Amen.
So okay, he was instructed to build this large vessel, and in the process that we may not understand, and this is from a little bit of my background, you have to understand when he built this and cut the wood and chopped it and prepared it to be built on this big vessel, we're talking that he had to use a particular type of fibrous asphaltish material to keep this vessel constructed, to keep it together. So it would float, and so it would actually have the compressive strength of everything he needed to make this thing operate in the waters. Of course, back then, Noah wasn't prepared for the waters either, because basically they had never seen rain except the dew that came off of the plants in the morning. but he had never seen rain like he was about to see. So this particular substance that Noah had to use is called bitumen. Now bitumen is like tar, but tar is like a man-made substance. Now this goes back in a little bit of my background, but bitumen is a natural petroleum-based hydrocarbon, and it's real viscous, and you can imagine it's sticky. If you can imagine tar, and you're working with this with your hands, it's sticky, or it's pliable. You can work with it, but you got to spread this stuff all inside each one of these pieces of wood, and you got to make sure this wood and stuff together, hammered, nailed together, and then covered with this bitumen that actually keeps the boat not just afloat, but it's waterproof. Bitumen is waterproof. It's just like when you drive on these highways and you see this tar and everything, and there's asphalt. It's actually waterproof. That's why the roads can sustain 18-wheelers and tractors and different other things that actually tear it up. Of course, over a period of time, it's going to tear up. But basically, he used this on the ark. And when he used this on the ark, it allowed the ark to not only be strong, but allowed the ark to be waterproof. So Noah built the ark, and like I said, he had some adversities. But through the adversities and him building the ark, and understand what Noah became and how this ark was built. This ark was 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, 51 feet tall, and actually 210 feet longer than a football field. And I don't know how y'all look at that in your mind, but in my mind, we're talking about something that's astronomically large. I mean, really large. When you're talking about longer than a football field, Thomas, you can relate this probably more than it is. Because he played on the football field. And we're talking about going 100 yards and a vessel being that big. That's why I say when you can tell a child a story and you could really make it sound good and juicy, your kids will say, God, Granddad, that's huge, that's big, that's gigantic. So we're thinking about this in our mind and saying this thing is gigantic. And it's being built by hand. You ain't got no cranes. You don't have dozers. You don't have different things to put this thing together. This is all done by this and this. And one specific blueprint. So Noah has all this going on. He has the adversities that he's dealing with. But in the adversities, one thing happens to Noah in the adversity. And this is actually the whole foundation of this message. Now Noah was 600 years when that ark got built. So somewhere in between 75 and 100 years, it took him 100 years or 75 years to build this ark. And thinking of how big this is, it would take 100 years to build something of that magnitude. But in building the ark and going through Noah's life and going through his adversities, guess what happened to Noah? Noah adapted. And you wonder, how did he adapt? Noah became a shipbuilder. He became pretty much a sailor or a ship's captain. And his family had to adapt to something that they hadn't seen, which was rain. And if we don't look at, was probably the most critical situation is when it rains that long, you got to deal with flood water then. And when it rains so much to where the water gets so high that it covers mountainous areas. Because right now, the ark that Noah was in, they say they have found it in Turkey in the mouth of Aram. I can't pronounce it properly, but that's where the ark is. And if you see the basis of the overall schematic of the size of that ark, it's gigantic. It's gigantic. It's just, I guess it astounds me to see how God was able to get a man lined up, but he's done so many miraculous things, to get a man lined up to build something of this magnitude. But he became, in his adaptation, he became a shipbuilder, as I mentioned before, a ship's captain. He also became a caretaker and a caregiver. Now, I don't know how y'all feel about bringing animals, you know, a bunch of animals in a situation, but Noah was given orders to bring animals on board this vessel. And what I never looked at, I had to look at this from a different perspective, because Noah was told to bring the animals on board, but in the process, he said, the Lord don't bring 7 pairs of the clean animals and only 2 pairs of the unclean. So he didn't just have to bring, everybody think, well, 2 elephants. Oh, okay, male and female. Oh, 2 giraffes. Oh, male and female. No, he had to bring 7 pairs of these animals. And then he had to house these animals inside this big vessel. Now, Noah wasn't just a caretaker, caregiver. Noah was a sanitation engineer too, because the animals got to eat and they got to release themselves. So somebody got to get rid of that stuff in that shit. So Noah became also a sanitation engineer. So he adapted to all these different facets of what he was given to do. He adapted. And that's why I say that when the title comes up about life itself overall, we're designed by God to adapt. Through Noah's adversity, through the life he lived, he adapted.
Yes.
And in his adaptation, Noah, or the end result, is transformed. He became from the adaptation to a transformation. It transformed Noah into someone else, someone different, someone better, someone brighter, someone smarter. So when we do any type, or if we learn to do any type of skill sets, or whatever we do, we adapt. Once we adapt, then you got it. I'm going to give you an example of adaptation. Adapting is when you can't walk well because your hip is jacked up and your bones ain't doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you ain't walking right, you ain't feeling right, and you're hurting and you're in pain, but you got to do something about it. So you get it worked on, get cut on, and then you're in pain because, well, you kind of get pain every now and then. You walk around because you kind of rub with that pain on you. But guess what happens after it's all said and done? You adapt. You adapt to a position to where you can walk. You can walk now. You still got a little limp, but you can walk. You can do the things that you need to do. Pretty soon, you won't need a chauffeur. Pretty soon, you can do some of them things. You can move them hips around a little bit now. You can start using that body a little bit. And what happens after you adapt? You transform. You transform into who you were before, but you're better.
All right.
You're a lot better.
Yeah.
Because that hip is working good. You ain't got no issue, no problem. You walk and you got that kind of pep in your step again. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I had a hip operation, but man, let me tell you something right now. I feel like I'm 25 years old. I ain't gonna do what I did when I was 25 years old. I feel like I'm 25. So you adapt and you transform. And actually, Noah's transformation came because of his adaptation. He adapted, and we all adapt. What really kind of blows you away about adapting is how the world has adapted. When I say we adapt, think about this for a minute. I'll give you a little bit of chew on right here. Because the Lord made a covenant, a promise, a pledge with Noah, and when he was transformed, Noah, he became not just righteous and upstanding, but he was transformed into one of the ultimate servants of the Lord. When you follow the book and you follow everything that you've been given to do, the tasks that have been done, and you've been obedient, what is greater than being a servant of the Lord, of the Most High God?
All right.
There's nothing higher to serve him. When Minister Ann goes out and she talks to some of them folks at work, irregardless to whether they're hard-headed, goofy, foolish, whatever. When she talks to these people and she's adapted already to the word's in her. So she gives this word to someone else, and guess what happens? Yes, they're transformed. They actually turn around into doing some things that they may not have done before.
Right.
But in everything that transpires during that period of time, what she did was the beginning. Her purpose was as a servant to give that word to someone else. That makes you so much greater.
Yes.
Because you know what? You're giving out what's been given to you. And when he implants that in your heart, believe me, and you give it to someone else, think about what you've done. You saved that person. You didn't save them. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to get this twisted. You didn't save them, but what you gave them through the Lord saved them. It's a seed, like they say, a seed being planted. Once a seed is planted, then somebody comes along and put a little water on there, and it develops. I'm going to tell you something also is that understanding adaptation, we've adapted to COVID-19. This is probably one of the better examples I can give you, is we've adapted to COVID-19. Hey, do you remember a time when Carlos, you didn't have to wear that mask? Don't you remember that? You remember that pretty well, don't you? Not too long ago, you wasn't wearing a mask to go to Walmart. You wasn't wearing a mask to go to get groceries or go down the street inside of a building. You wasn't wearing no mask or face shield. You wasn't going through that process. But guess what? Now you're wearing one. You've adapted. You've adapted to what's transpired. I'm going to tell you what happened in this world. COVID-19 is basically like every other disease, pandemic disease. What we never look at in this process, and I did a little research here. I was talking to see about what happens when we adapt. And what's really mind-blowing is there's been a lot of worldwide diseases, but we never look into what transpired when we had these worldwide diseases. And it's alarming. Even though we adapted to COVID-19 and maybe 1.1 million people or however many thousand people have contacted it and it's still living, I'm going to give you some figures on some things. The measles, chickenpox, smallpox. Do you know smallpox took 300 to 500 million in the 20th century? Isn't that amazing? 300 to 500 million? I looked at that number, I had to go back and look at it again. These cases took place in 50 million cases a year in the 1950s. Unbelievable. Polio, 500,000 deaths in the 1940s and 1950s. Malaria, 440,000. In 2016, 90% in Africa, the flu had 646,000 deaths. It's unbelievable how we look at our situation of coronavirus and then we adapt. If we follow the rules and do the things we should do, we can actually knock this thing out in no time. People are hard-headed. They got their own mindset for what they need to do, but when you actually follow the rules of what needs to be done to cause this thing to subside and dissipate, sometimes we just don't follow those rules. Even though it's been given to us by the CDC. And see, the Center for Disease Control is where I got this information from. And the reason I got it is because things like yellow fever and black plague, 50 million deaths a year from the black plague. And so many other issues of life that we face. I just want to give you some numbers, basically let you know that COVID-19 and coronavirus is something we've adapted to. But I'm going to tell you something. Even though you've adapted to it, your transformation from it is the end result of where you're going to be. So this is going to happen for a season. And it's happening for a season. Ain't nothing we can do. It's taking place. but we will be transformed into something entirely different. What this is over, we can look back on this. I'm sure that if our grandparents, if my grandparents were alive now, and my great-grandparents, they could tell us how they adapted to some of the really bad diseases of their time. And they succumbed to it. They survived. Millions and millions of people lost their lives through those epic situations, but they adapted and they transformed.
All right.
And they moved forward. But my scripture verses that I want to give you is Philippians 4:11 and 12. And I told you before that adaptation brings about transformation. So what Paul says. Paul says, not that I was speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound or be brought up. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. That's called adapting, folks. That's called adapting. Paul lets you know that he can adapt. And in his adaptation, he takes on the transformation. So we don't see, and we may not look at adapting and transforming in the same sense, but I'm going to give you some words that actually is true. It says, adaptation is a change or process of change to which you become better suited to your environment. Also, a change or modification to suit new or better conditions or needs. Transformation, on the other hand, is an extreme and radical change. So actually, it's kind of like the same thing. But transformation takes on a different personification when it says, is an extreme radical change. It's transformation. And if you ever looked in the dictionary where it comes down and it says similar words, they'll say, like, you read the heading of the words and they'll say, this is similar to that. Or this is kind of like that. And when they say similar, this means words that are close, like-minded, to certain other words, they're resembling without being identical. So they're not the same, it's just close to it. So these words that are similar to adapt or adaptation is conversion, altercation, modification, adjustment, changing, revamping, reshaping, reconstruction, conformity, habituation, orientation, conditioning, acculturation, assimilation, domestication, naturalization, acclimation, and of course, familiarization. All those words I threw out at you are similar to or adaptation. Similar, not the same, similar. But in every word that's listed down here, they cause transformation. So when we talk about transforming, and when Paul tells us that I'm not speaking of being in need of, I've learned whatever situation to be content. I know how to be brought low and brought high. He ends by saying, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. That is adapt.
Amen.
And every individual in here, within the sound of our voice, has adapted to something. I don't care what it was. You adapted to something. Whether it was a loss of a family member, whether it was a gain of something else, you adapted. And I promise you, after, and some of us are still going through adaptation, but I promise you, once you get through this adaptation, you will be transformed. Because those things that you had before, you remember before, or transpired before in your life, that changes completely when you're transformed. Because in essence, what happens is all the things that you had to deal with during this adaptation, it's still there. They still happen. It doesn't change what happened. But you become transformed. You become changed. You all of a sudden make that radical change. And it may not seem like that's what happened, but that's what happens. Like I said, I mentioned Thomas Earl because basically he's a good example what's going to happen. He right now, he's adapting. If you ask him back there, I don't see it back there, but I think he got a cane back there.
Okay.
He's adapting. But when he gets to adapting, he'll transform. And our transformation, and that's the reason why this message is so important, because even though we adapt, and we're adapting to COVID-19, don't get me wrong, but even though we've adapted, we will be transformed. We will be better. As much as you may not believe it, as much as you may have lost someone in this epic situation, you're going to be better.
Amen.
You're still here. That alone says a lot.
Amen.
So you got to be doing something right. Don't get me wrong. There was a lot of people that passed away. I'm here to tell you, that were solid, born again, blood-bought believers. No doubt in my mind. But hey, they're not dealing with this no more. They in not their place. If they know who we know, they're not their place. So they went through their transformation. That transformation is a lot higher than where we're at right now. But we understand that whenever we live a life that's hard or tough, with difficulties, and yet we are content, or we stay content, this is what pleases God. I'm serious. We would think that, these things would bother us or bother our Lord. But when we handle our difficulties, it's like Mr. Ann said, and we still give God praise in those situations, believe me, you're going through transformation, people. And this is what is most pleasing to God, because you can go through that, and always remember, you're going through it. And transformation is taking place. When we can adapt to circumstances and still give God praise and glory for His goodness, God is well pleased. It makes Him happy. But when we are discontent in our circumstances, then we tell God we're not satisfied with Him because He is sovereign over all that happens to us. And we shouldn't let these circumstances rob us of our joy. Because actually our joy isn't dependent upon what happens in life, good or bad. But it's dependent on what Jesus Christ has already done for us. That's what it's dependent upon.
Amen.
I really had to get some thinking about this, because I kept wrestling and I talked to my wife about it and said, does that make sense to you, honey? Yeah, it makes plenty of sense. When we adapt, we do transform. In Romans 12:2 it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing or the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So He tells us that. He tells us to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. When we're transformed, we adapt, and we transform our thinking, and basically you allow that thinking to come from your heart instead of just kind of like our stupid head sometimes. Then we understand what the will of God is. I think that basically a lot of times we don't think things out. I process things probably a lot different from a lot of people. And I think that's what makes it so unique. God made us so uniquely different. Even when we convey His word, it's different. But at the same time, when we understand how the Lord has set us to do the things that we need to do, and that's why I was so excited this morning. I didn't want to wait and come out because Miss Ann had set up some good music for Thomas to play, or either Thomas set up, and I just couldn't. I told, she said, I can't sit still back here. I got to come here and listen just to praise and worship. I had to come out here because I really was anxious and thankful that I had this opportunity. And one thing I have learned is I've adapted. And I think I'm still going through a transformation period, but I've adapted to understand that when you're away from the Word, when you're away from your family in Christ, I'm not going to say there's an emptiness, I'm just gonna say that you need the fellowship of your brothers and sisters. You need it. And when we allow things like coronavirus or COVID-19 to dissipate that or keep us away from that, we have to catch up. So my wife and I, we're going through a catch-up phase. We're catching up. And what I find is so wonderful is catching up is great. It's good. When I walk through these doors, I still feel the same way I felt 5, 6 years ago. But actually, when we came through again this time, it was like brand new, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like, we're back home again.
Amen.
Oh. And it's just an exuberance because you miss the faces, you miss the family. You guys are our family. So we've adapted to understand that when you don't see family in a long time, the reunion is always so great. You come back in like, man, I'm so glad to see you. Inside you say, yeah, you know, like you're saying, you're like jumping jacks. You're inside jumping in your physical body, and your heart is elated. You know, to see people like Sister Barbara Coleman and you know, Ruffin Brother, you know, college, just seeing the people that you love. And I think that old saying about absence makes the heart grow fonder, I think that's a big part of it also. But back to the overall message, I just want basically everyone to understand that when we adapt to things that have happened all around us, whether it be hip surgery, whether it be losses, whatever it is, when we adapt, we transform. And when we transform, I promise you it's a lot better. It's something that happens to each and every one of us. It just takes a period of time to get there. I'm sure that directly after Thomas' surgery, he wasn't go out here and run up down the field or cut grass. It's a period of time that you wait to transform and become who you were before, or better than you were before. But in everyone here, you have gone through adaptation and transformation. Believe it or not.
Amen.
It may take a period. It may take a time. It may take someone that broke your heart or did something that wasn't proper to do to you. But guess what? You adapted. And after you adapted, you transformed. You got better. Those things happen in each and every one of us. Each and every one of our lives. We've been through hurts. We've been through pains. We've been through sufferings. But in that process of adaptation, you take on
Amen.
transformation.